The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. You are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, the Tokin Jew in Alameda, California. And I am lucky enough each week I get to speak to some of the most interesting people on the face of the planet. This is no exception, but it's extra special for me. An old campmate from Kittatinny Camp in the Poconos back in the 50s and early 60s. We go back a long way. I am so happy to have you as a guest, Dr. Richard Berk. How are you, Richard?
I'm good. You can call me Dick if you want. Just forget the diminutive. But that's a interesting introduction for a retiree. This is okay.
Well, you can be a retiree and still be the most interesting person. First of all, what did you tell my guests what you retired from? You're one of the true leaders in your field of endeavor. What was your career like as a doctor?
Interestingly enough, I started. I went to Penn and graduated there. Then went cross country to San Diego, near you, and I interned there in 1968. For those who played golf back then, I could play Torrey Pines for $5 and not wait at all on a Saturday, which was an interesting time. I did my residency at Michael Reese. Did some Army. It's in the Army in between a year at Fort Bragg, a year in Vietnam, and then my fellowship at Sloan Kettering, and finally wound up practicing just outside Chicago at Evanston Hospital.
Wow. Amazing how many of our contemporaries at camp went into the medical field. You mentioned Southern California. Joe Sherman, who was Joe Schmuckler at the time, is a medical doctor, and I wonder if you ran into him in your practice down there or in your schooling down there.
Well, not as an intern, but after I was in practice, I then worked for the American College of Surgeons Commission on Cancer and surveyed cancer programs all over the country. And one of the places I went to was San Diego. And before I got there, I called him up. We had dinner together, which was really a nice experience. He lives in a beautiful house overlooking the water. Because of the tax structure in California, he could afford it. But he went into pain management and anesthesia. He's still functioning quite well.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I think a few months ago we talked about a mutual friend from back those days. He was a counselor when you were still a camper. You and your brother and your contemporaries were like big brothers to us. My brother and I were a few years behind you. And when I pictured you and Joel together, arguably the two best athletes at Kittatinny Camp at your time.
Well, Joe was. Don't look at me, but Joe was.
Well, I will look at you in the sense that you were a camp athlete in 1962 or whatever.
57.
Oh, okay.
Towards the end of my illustrious career there.
And it was. You and your brother were always pitted against each other, your identical twin, in in color. They called it color war back then. Now they refer to it as color contest, which, but those color wars were what they were, and they were brutal and competitive, and you and Bobby were anchors athletically. Richard, and I still refer to you with the respect you deserve. Let's talk a little bit about the professional athletes that came up to Kittatinny to give weekend clinics. And let me mention the two most prominent ones were Paul Arison and Chuck Bednarik. And if you could go back in your memory, what was it like? I know what it was like for me, but you were older, and I want to know what you got out of those clinics and what a thrill it must have been for you, as it was for me, to sit with these guys in our respective bunks, and they'd come in and they'd talk and they'd sit on the corner of your bed, and we're talking about Paul freaking Allison and Chuck Bednarik. Chuck freaking Bednarik. Share some memories of those days.
Some people don't even know who Paul Arison is or was, but he played for the Philadelphia Warriors before they transferred to the West Coast. Paul Arison gave me a lasting memory. He almost broke my arm. We were playing a little basketball, and he tried to steal the ball, but he came down very hard on my forearm, and I left a bruise there for a couple of days. So that was a very interesting memory. But Chuck Bednarik was a hero of mine. I grew up in Philadelphia. The Eagles were my team. He was the last 60-minute man who played both ways for the Philadelphia Eagles. And he brought up with him his brother. And interestingly enough, they used to refer to each other as Jeep and Truck. That was their nicknames. And to me, I was like, you're standing in the presence of a hero. What do you do? What do you say? You just watch. You just listen. There's nothing you can do. It's that you're awestruck. Both of these people came up probably because of Chuck Smerin, who was the boys' head counselor, who was a referee in real time in the real world as well as a teacher. But he was the person who brought them in. But having those people up there was really, really interesting. And in fact, when I talked to Joe when I was out there recently, it must have been 5 or 6 years ago, he had mentioned that he had time with Paul Arison alone and picked up some pointers from him as well. So to me, that was interesting.
I remember it was their off season, the Arison's off season, and I remember him. He was kind of out of shape a little bit, but he was scrimmaging with said Joe Schmuckler, and Joe Schmuckler kept up with him. I remember this one particular scrimmage. I'm not saying he kicked his ass or anything, but Joe Schmuckler went on to Temple. He was quite a player in his own right. He was, and he held his own against Paul Arison in some scrimmages. So, and I remember Chuck Bednarik teaching the kids about the draft and what have you. And we were learning the intricacies of the sport like you could never get on the street. It was just terrific, and they were both communicative and happy to be there It wasn't like a job for them. And you could tell they were just spending the summer making a few bucks. Back in those days, athletes had to do something in the summer.
I was just going to say that. Because it was not a full-time job. Football was not a full-time job. Basketball was not a full-time job. The salaries were clearly not enough to support them like they are now. I always wonder what these people would have earned had they had to come along in today's market. My guess is if they were the same quality, they'd probably make a mint. But back then, they weren't making much at all, and they had to have a second job to support their own life.
Well, Allison, all his basketball career worked for IBM as well, and he was able to negotiate a contract based on, if you don't want me, really, I'll play. I'll go to IBM and I'll be happy, but I'm not going to play for one nickel less than what I think I deserve. Very few and far between athletes could do that in the time of no unions and basically no security and no pension unless you earn it and this, that, and the other thing. Times are changing, have changed. Richard, do you remember, you were a Philly guy, do you remember the Whiz Kids, the Philly Whiz Kids?
I could name half of them. We used to love going to, in fact, Shy Park and then Connie Mack Stadium. But we used to go down there, take the bus down and the subway down, get off at Lehigh, walk over to 21st Street, and sit in right field for batting practice and catch balls. And they were ours to take home. But you could do that. You could ride the subway in Philadelphia. You can't do that anymore. Shy Park doesn't exist anymore. I think got destroyed. But it reminded me, when I lived in Chicago, in the same type of setting that Wrigley Field is. It's in the middle of a neighborhood. You can't park there. It's an impossible place to get around on game day, but it has the same following. But yeah, the Whiz Kids, we loved them. But yeah, Ashburn, let's see, it was Robertson, Simmons in the mound, LaPata catching, Hamler, Jones, Boucher. I think Boucher was on that team.
I think that was a little before Boucher, if I'm not mistaken. Delennis was a very, very underrated ball player. He was excellent, small stretch of time, but nevertheless, he was solid, gave Philadelphia some really good years. I want to interject something. We lost in our Kittatinny family very recently Iris Raid, and it's a crushing blow to those who knew her. She was very special. She had two brothers and an older sister, Toby, and I realized, I found out after Iris died, Toby died a few years ago as well. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, I just found that out recently. It's sad, and mortality is sad. I don't have to tell you as a doctor that what it is.
It comes to all of us.
Yes.
Every one of us. You never get out of this place alive. So every day should be lived to its fullest, and make sure everything you do is positive. There's not enough time to be angry. It's just wasted time. It's just one of those deals. This current climate we're living in here in the United States, the political climate, the inter-community climate, makes it very, very hard to be happy at times. But you have to pick what you want and stay with what you believe in, and follow the philosophy. There's no such thing as bad, just all degrees of good.
Good. Before I let you go, I want you to tell me. You mentioned him a while ago, Chuck Smirin.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you learned from Chuck? He was such a tremendous educator and a communicator and a coach, a referee too. But I was so. He left camp when I was about 10 or 11. So, but my memories of him can stand to be enhanced by you talking about him, if you would.
To me, he was a glue that held everything together. He had integrity. He had honesty. He acted in his real life like he did on the field. There was very little gray in terms of what was positive or negative, but he did have that flexibility to look at the situation at hand. It was really, to me, he was the reason that the camp functioned so well, at least on the boys' side. I'm very happy to have him as a head counselor. I left, my last year there was 1960, and I would have returned as a counselor in 61, except I was told I wasn't allowed. I had to work. I did. I worked in a clothing factory in Philadelphia as a pattern boy to earn some money. It was very interesting work, by the way. It was like walking into a story that had no end. There was characters there. There was a secretary who looked like Petunia Pig. There was a little Louis who was the little loudmouth. There was the college graduate who read during lunchtime. There was the thief who always cut himself more clothing to take home and make his own suit. I mean, with a cigar in his mouth. All these things were what I learned as lived through in that first year of working. But Chuck made my time there from 55 to 60 enjoyable and something that you can't explain as to what that is. It was a way to solidify a camp experience to make everything worthwhile. There was no shenanigans going on, if people remember that word at the time. But for me, that's what it was about, just the ability to hold everything together and make sure everyone had a good time at camp. Loved it.
Final question. Richard, what motivated you? I know your dad was a doctor. Is that what motivated you to go into medicine? It was part of it, but I enjoyed it. I had the opportunity to do some things before even going to college, or during college, in hospitals, and it solidified what I wanted to do. What I really wanted, I thought I wanted, was to be a plastic surgeon. And I wound up getting a fellowship to Sloan Kettering and being a surgical oncologist, which I enjoy fully. I've been retired now for about 11 or 12 years now, for a number of reasons, and have maintained my work with the Commission on Cancer up until this year. So as you get older, things change, and you find yourself unable to do the job you want to do. But being a physician, I wouldn't trade it. The hours were terrible. You're basically on 24/7. 3 a.m. phone calls,
for emergency surgery, trauma, gunshots, all those things. It makes being able to do something, and surgeons are the true internists. They can do something right away. Everyone else has to wait and see what happens, but surgeons are right there to make that decision. So I enjoyed all the years I spent putting people back together. When somebody asked what I do, I said I take people apart and put them back together. So to me, it was an enjoyable life and still has been.
Wonderful. I'm so happy I finally got you on the podcast.
You've been trying to do this for 7 years.
Absolutely, I have.
Yes,
actively tried to get you on and hear your voice for 7 years, and this is a big day.
One of the things I miss you is that we had a reunion back in 1999 in Philadelphia, and that was an issue. People came from all over the country. The problem we had was that the names of people, I don't know if you knew this, the names of people on the Henry's list disappeared because when Henry died, his wife got rid of all the records. So we had no way to trace people down. But people came from Florida, from California, from the Midwest, from the Southwest, from the East Coast, and we all met at Willow Grove, just north of Philadelphia, and had a great time. If you want, there's a video of that event. You never saw the video, did you?
I never did, but you were nice enough to send me pictures. When I first started my blog, I did a thread on Kittatinny Camp, and you and Barbara Burton and a number of other people contributed pictures, and I'm totally grateful. Bobby did as well. Bobby, your brother, and it remains up there. Pushpull.com.
Yeah, I love that name. Larson cartoon, my favorite cartoonist.
Right, exactly. Pushing on the doors of life, North Pole. And that is exactly describes the way I've gone through life. It hasn't been taking it my way and doing it alternatively isn't easy, but it's cathartic. And we both lived our lives the way we wanted to. You with great success, and me, I lived to. But
success is relative.
Ours is relative. As I told you, pardon me? No, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
You'll do me a favor, and offline, send me your address. I'll send you a copy of the reunion.
Beautiful. Let's keep in touch and not wait 7 more years to do this again. And thank you. I will put this on the Facebook Kittatinny site, and if you would just please comment on it, because it was one of my favorite podcasts. 3,000 plus offerings. This is among the top 5 of my semi-illustrious career. So thank you again, Richard, and we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening. Thank you. I said.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.